Since the year 2003, the year many of our entering freshmen were born, more than 15 deadly tropical storms and hurricanes have struck North Carolina. Our state ranks 4th in the United States, just behind Florida, Texas, and Louisiana for the frequency of storms that have produced hurricane-force winds. In the 1990s, Hurricanes Fran and Floyd ravaged Raleigh and towns in eastern North Carolina, and in 2005, Category 5 Hurricane Katrina wiped out entire neighborhoods and communities in New Orleans. High winds pummeled the city, floodwaters broke through the levees and drowned parts of the city. Houses were destroyed, leaving many homeless and without basic services. Tragically, over 1,800 people lost their lives.
Katrina was obviously not the first or only large storm to overwhelm a major U.S. city, but in the aftermath, the massive damage to property and life became a sobering reminder that Atlantic storms were becoming stronger and more frequent, and that low-lying urban areas were growing more vulnerable to sea level rise and the effects of climate change. Katrina left many people, politicians, city planners, first responders, environmentalists, scientists, and engineers wondering what could be done to prevent more Katrinas. Or at least, how can we mitigate the adverse effects of massive storms and climate change?
Seeing an obvious opportunity for designers to provide some solutions, Andy and I were drawn individually to post-disaster recovery efforts. As part of a recovery team, I got to see firsthand how Hurricane Floyd mangled single-family houses in eastern North Carolina. And Andy had lived and studied in South Louisiana, so he understood the realities of communities on the front lines of climate and environmental justice issues. And Katrina left many eastern seaboard cities, including New York, asking, what if? What if a Category 3, 4, or 5 were to hit us? How would our town be prepared to handle the devastation? Where would people live? Immediately, temporarily, and even long-term. Andy began working on a concept called PARCS, that's P-A-R-C-S, or Proactive Recovery Community Structures. His idea was to equip public parks with the necessary infrastructure so that they could be rapidly converted to accommodate temporary relief housing. A public amenity comes equipped for relief scenarios. Meanwhile, I was designing new prototypes for recovery housing as an alternative to the trailers that were deployed after Katrina. My focus was waterborne modular housing made of resilient, lightweight materials such as fiber composites, specifically for New York City. I wanted to know how we could rapidly deploy housing units to affected areas. And more specifically, how could we mobilize coastal industries and shipping ports to assemble and deliver housing on barges? Upon discovering our shared interest, we knew that we should team up. The Coastal Dynamics Design Lab, or the CDDL, was a natural outcome of these initial projects. Andy and I established the lab in 2013 because we wanted to show how good design could address one of the most wicked problems of the 21st century: climate change and its devastating effects on our coastal regions.
As designers, we often like to begin by saying, or asking, imagine if. Imagine if we can make something lighter, stronger, faster, more eco-friendly, less expensive, more durable, more resilient, and more beautiful. We also consider the results of not acting on a challenge. Imagine if we do nothing as architects and landscape architects to address climate change and sea level rise. What are the consequences in ecological terms and in terms of human health and well-being? This is not very difficult at all to imagine. We have already seen the results in North Carolina. Major storms have become more frequent and more damaging. Consider the 1, 2, 3 punch of Hurricanes Matthew, Florence, and Michael in the short time span of only 23 months, from 2016 to 2018. In North Carolina alone, these storms caused over $18 billion in damage and more than 50 people lost their lives.
The effects on the North Carolina coast are plain to see, particularly on the Outer Banks, where the shoreline is moving ever closer to beachfront houses. In some cases, like in Rodanthe, the houses stand no chance against the relentless waves.
But the coastline is not the only place in North Carolina that has been devastated by climate change and powerful Atlantic storms. In our state, there is a vast coastal plain region that begins just east of the state capital in Raleigh and extends to the Outer Banks in the north and central coastline, and the Crystal Coast in the southeast part of the state. This region is known for its fertile soil and flat sandy terrain. Farming communities and small towns dot the intercoastal plain, and fishing villages, beach resort towns, shipping ports, and larger communities such as Wilmington are located in the outer coastal plain, including the inner and outer banks. In total, 1.2 million people inhabit North Carolina's coastal region, and each of the 20 coastal counties has experienced severe weather from hurricanes, nor'easters, and recurring floods. Our beach towns get a lot of attention, and rightly so, whenever storms are approaching. We watch the news and weather reports to see the potential storm tracks. When will it make landfall? Where will it make landfall? What category will it be? 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5? Will it lessen to just a tropical storm by the time it reaches Raleigh? The coastal settlements often take the first blow from storms and make the news headlines. How many times have we seen a wind-blown Jim Cantore staring down hurricanes in places like Miami, New Orleans, or even Wilmington? The storms are acute and intermittent, but slower moving, long-term effects of climate change and sea level rise are apparent on the shifting North Carolina coastline. Aerial photographs show that our shoreline moves over time, either naturally due to erosion or by engineered interventions, such as beach nourishment that transports sand mechanically from one place to another. Along the Outer Banks, new inlets open up after storms and sections of Highway 12 get washed out, stifling traffic along the main north-south artery. But the story doesn't end at the coast. In fact, the communities further inland suffer just as much, if not more, than beachfront towns. Here are a few reasons why. If you look at a map of eastern North Carolina, you see a heavily veined network of rivers across 8 main watershed basins that drain from North Carolina and central North Carolina's mountain and Piedmont regions to the Atlantic. Early settlements grew up along these rivers because of the adjacent fertile croplands and the shipping routes afforded by the waterways. Towns like Lumberton, Tarboro, and Kinston took advantage of their geographic locations to develop strong agricultural and industrial economies that were embedded in the ecology and climate of the place. But these same rivers have been the source of tragedy. High winds from hurricanes push river waters westward, and once the storm subsides, massive amounts of water begin flowing eastward. Towns in the floodplain endure the storm effects coming and going as water levels crest above levees and inundate developed areas. We have seen this happen many times in places like Princeville and Lumberton, municipalities that don't have the resources of wealthier, larger cities like Wilmington.
Some would ask, why do we continue to develop and build in these hazard-prone areas? There's no doubt that we should not put people and structures in the most vulnerable places, and that recurring damages should teach us valuable lessons about where and how to build. On the other hand, think about the cultural and social and economic value of our coastal regions. Agriculture, shipping, and tourism are major drivers of our state's economy, and they provide jobs, food, livelihood, and enjoyment for residents and visitors to the state. So again, as designers, we want to reimagine if. What if we act through sustainable and resilient design practices that are informed by science? What if we work collaboratively with engineers, planners, and coastal ecology experts? What if we develop a deep understanding of the people and communities in North Carolina's coastal regions and engage them in creating solutions? How can we, as professors at NC State, draw on the university's vast resources, expertise, and mission to serve the people of North Carolina as a land-grant institution? How can design thinking help to solve these wicked problems?
The university's motto is Think and Do. At the Coastal Dynamics Design Lab, or CDDL, our mission is to organize and lead trans-disciplinary research and design teams to address critical ecological and community development challenges in vulnerable coastal regions and shoreline communities, with a concentrated focus on eastern North Carolina and the Mid-Atlantic coastal plain. The CDDL brings designers together with scientists and local stakeholders to create innovative, sustainable, adaptable, and resilient design solutions that address the environmental and human needs of coastal and riverine communities. These environments are vulnerable to challenges from both long-term sea level variations and the more acute forces of powerful Atlantic storms and extreme precipitation events. The collaborative project teams at the CDDL seek a greater understanding of these dynamic natural forces and the human-made environments that shape the bioregion. In recent projects, the CDDL has provided various eastern North Carolina communities with technical assistance focused on design and programming strategies for both short-term rebuilding activities and long-term resiliency planning. These efforts have successfully contributed to increasing local capacity related to aspects of community development, recreation, and heritage-based tourism, management of public landscapes, navigating disaster recovery processes, and identifying and leveraging funding resources. Outcomes of these efforts include citizen engagement activities, policy and programming recommendations, planning reports and design plans, and construction and installation of numerous community amenities.
Students play a major role in the CDDL's work. They are involved in many aspects of our research and our courses. Andy and I teach a collaborative studio each year in which students from various design disciplines, and sometimes engineering, work with community partners to create design solutions. Most of our students are not from the coast of North Carolina, so we spend a lot of time introducing them to the environments that we work in and the people who live there. We engage our students and the projects in an immersive, longitudinal way, working on land, sea, and air to gain a new perspective and better understanding of the problems we are trying to address. Field trips and on-site observation are critical to our understanding and success. We employ new technologies such as drones to analyze environmental conditions and gather data. We use tangible landscape digital tools that help us to model and test potential solutions. And we use design and visualization software to communicate with stakeholders by illustrating and animating our solutions. Reimagining is about communicating ideas. A primary aspect of our work is getting to know the people in the communities that we work with. Local knowledge is often the best knowledge. We like to think that we are designing with other people, not just designing for other people. Our partnerships with communities drive our work.
In Beaufort, North Carolina, students imagine new civic parks that not only provide places for recreation, but also serve as staging sites in post-disaster situations. They propose new green streets and infrastructure to mitigate sunny day floods that plague the town, and they envision projects such as a brewery and a boat building workshop that would create new jobs and spur the local economy.
Students in the lab teamed with the College of Engineering and the UNC Coastal Studies Institute to design more resilient and sustainable coastal housing and boathouses for the Institute on Roanoke Island. These houses provide examples of sturdy construction techniques, self-protecting components that can be deployed in the event of high winds, and on-site energy generation, and living spaces that are elevated above flood levels. In Nags Head, on the Outer Banks, students worked with town leaders and planners to create new master plans, resilient housing, and a Soundside Environmental History Center. Our students tackled difficult short and long-term problems that our barrier islands face.
In Princeville, the oldest town in the United States chartered by Black people, we have worked with the residents and commissioners on a variety of projects to increase their resilience to flooding while celebrating their history and telling their story to visitors. Landscape architecture students have planted new gardens and developed new interpretive signage. Architecture students designed and built a new mobile museum to temporarily replace the town's historic 1920s museum, which was severely damaged by Hurricane Matthew floodwaters. In design workshops, professional designers, students, and residents worked together to create a new vision for the entire town. All of these projects seek a greater understanding of climate change and its effects on people, communities, and the environment. We feel grateful that we are part of NC State University and the College of Design, where we are connected to expert colleagues and talented students who are eager to take on the most vexing and wicked problems. Current socio-ecological imperatives demand that architects, landscape architects, planners, and engineers address the question, what role can the design process, that's thinking abstractly, iterating, testing, and modifying, play in creating more resilient communities? The Coastal Dynamics Design Lab is committed to defining a role for design in addressing the most pressing issues of our time. With its legacy of outreach and engagement, its implicit mandate for invention and ingenuity, and its commitment to multidisciplinary collaboration, design is poised to participate in the international discourse around climate change, natural disasters, and coastal life as we know it. The students, staff, and faculty in the lab are reimagining a more resilient and sustainable coastal region for North Carolina and demonstrating how good design is critical to safe, productive, and beautiful coastal communities. We conclude by issuing to you the same challenge as the students in our respective programs. How will you use your skills and passions to confront and address current and future climate challenges that protect and enhance the environments that sustain us and the communities we call home?